To start with, the topic is quite self-explanatory. I'm looking at the transgressions of brands, but I'm specifically looking at the person brands, and we're going to talk about how we define them. And of course, when you are going to take personas like religious or liberal personas, right, you are definitely going to offend one or another group. And therefore, there's going to be some bias in consumer response when a transgression will happen. So, to start with, all brands are human brands, right, with different degree of fame and success, and they take multiple shapes, types, and forms. So here you can see that at the bottom of the left, there is a brand that is not of extremely high value. On the top corner of the right side, you can find somebody who is extremely, a valuable brand in the eyes of the consumers. So the first thing that we need to establish here is we are talking about a subcategory of human brands. Okay. Now, it will be quite erroneous to consider the term person brand as synonymous with celebrity branding, personal branding, and human brands. So as I mentioned earlier, all human are brands and all other types come under its umbrella. So personal branding is a broader construct that includes celebrities as well as ordinary individuals who use branding strategies for their growth and success. So every human being that is somewhat aware about different branding strategies uh, is going to be, consider himself engaged in personal branding. On the other hand, celebrity brands have a publicly known and professionally managed persona whose equity stem from his or her ability to be identified by consumer base as a distinct from others. So this basically celebrities are publicly known because of their expertise and specialization in their what we call as natural domain of their talent. So there is a lot of literature on celebrities and celebrity endorsements, but recently the celebrities have started realizing that they can also use their celebrity status to create brands. So celebrities become person brands when they achieve a persona that is a unified form of a person and a commercial entity sold as a product or service in the marketplace with a recognized duality. So the point here is that it's not that the celebrities own brands, they do that, but it's that when the celebrities create a brand in their own name, that's what makes them a person brand. Okay. So one thing is that celebrities can own and manage different brands, but without having their name in the brand name. And the second opportunity or branding strategy is to use their name as a brand name to sell product and services. So person brands are the ultimate embodiment of the unity between a person and a brand in such a way that it becomes difficult to perceive them independently. And that's the most unique aspect of a person brand. So it is important to understand that at one side of a continuum, a brand can embed person specific associations. And on the other hand, a brand can be built around a successful person. So to become a person brand, usually it is assumed that you are already a successful celebrity brand that comes into a new domain where he offers product and services in his own name, right? Because you see that on one side of a continuum, one brand can take associations that are personification of humans, right? On the other hand, a human can become a brand, and that's what we're talking about in terms of person brand. So one common aspect of person brands is that they heavily depend on creating their brand personas through narratives. This statement is generally true for the brands as well because nowadays it is becoming more and more important to build your brand around some narratives to personally connect with the consumer rather than the functional approach of building a brand. For example, person brands can take religious or liberal personas in an anticipation that such narratives might not only resonate with their target customers, but will also serve as a buffering effect during crisis. So there are reasons why people are going to choose, or the brands or the person brands are going to choose religious or liberal personas. We might shed a little bit light on this topic as well, that why it is happening. Uh, so here is some examples. A brand can opt for a religious or liberal persona. For example, MTJ is a clothing brand in Pakistan, influenced by Maulana Tariq Jamil, a philanthropic, person. And there are other examples of, for example, famous TV actors, and I have shown the slide in start uh, here. So you will find them, all of them are person brands. Okay. So if you can identify any of them, that's great. I know few of them. I am pretty sure you know many of them that I'm showing in this picture. All of them are actually the examples of person brands. And then you can see that they have different narratives. Martha Stewart inclined towards more conservative, values of American society. Ben Shapiro also, and then you can think about Rihanna and others having different, narratives. So coming back to the point, regardless of their persona, a person brand might transgress at personal, and so personal level means that transgression, something like service failure, or communal level, that is usually labeled as moral transgression by a brand. So, past research hardly pay any attention to understand consumer attitude toward religious liberal brands in specific contexts, such as service failure or the types of transgressions, and the role of consumer personality traits, for example, the religiosity, or other personality traits, for example, openness. Thus, it is possible that in a service failure and recovery context, we might observe a buffering effect for a person brand from in-group members, but such effect might disappear when transgression is moral in nature. So what I'm proposing primarily is that there are two types of transgressions, and when it is a service failure, it is more likely that a consumer will, um, mitigate that negative experience based on congruence between the brand and his personality. But when it is going to be, other directed or moral transgressions, then probably that type of buffering effect might disappear. So why religious liberal divide? The religious liberal divide is an important context based on several factors, right? So we all know that means the religious slash conservative is quite overlapping in its nature, because many times these terms are used interchangeably, although people might argue that they are different. Uh, but in my point of view, it is quite overlapping concept. When we said religious or conservative, they are quite similar. When we said liberal or secular, they are also quite similar. So from my perspective, these are quite overlapping uh, constructs. So the ongoing cultural war between religious and liberals, and you can consider them as conservative and liberal worldview, and the resulting polarization of societies is quite evident. We have seen a lot of, horrible events because they are connected with this polarization of societies. We are viewing this polarization much more heavily in Western societies, but these polarizations are also present in what we call as third world countries as well. Similarly, the brands that promote religious or liberal values are also being present in both the Western and the developing countries as well. So, a diminishing distinction between secular and sacred in the marketplace, a rising culture of consumer buyout and boycott as a natural outcome of these tribal wars. So, all these reasons justified to use such narratives, because so for example, if you take advice from Machiavelli, so he is going to suggest you that you should take some sides. Being neutral is not going to be a best of the idea, right? So therefore, despite the apparent disadvantages of taking such narratives, it is more likely that the brands are going to choose these narratives, and you will find a lot of literature and a lot of media documentation of these narratives used by the brands as well as by person brands. Now, service failure is linked with forgiveness. Um, so religious people place way more importance on forgiveness norms, but act in a less forgiving manner towards transgressions as compared to less religious people. So the previous research has established this dilemma about religious people talking too much about forgiveness, but when they experience some mishaps or transgressions, they are less forgiving. Okay, which contradicts with their principle stance as well. So it creates a problem, but we don't know that if, for example, religious people are going to be that harsh towards the religious brands or not, because then the problem is that the religious brand is congruent with their values and therefore there might be some positive bias. So consumers with religious upbringing show less hostile reaction to service failure experience when symbols of religious festivals are present compared to when they were not. But it is reversed when service failure is other directed. So one research by Newton in 2018 looked into this issue, and so they were using some indirect, what we call as cues, to create this religious and liberal divide, and they conclude based on their research that when the symbols or the religious symbols were present, then the forgiveness was high. But when they were when they were present and the failure was person directed, there was a mitigating effect of religious affiliation. But when it was other directed, then the religious people were quite harsh in terms of their reaction. So religious affiliation of an organization provide buffering effect as consumers are less likely to personalize their failure compared with organizations with no affiliation. So others also suggest that um, religious affiliation of an organization do act as a buffering effect. So in short, the result of relationship between religiosity and post-recovery satisfaction are not consistent within the broader context of brand transgression and are rarely investigated in person brand context. So because this person brand context is also quite a recent phenomena, when this research was published by Fournier, and she and I think her colleague give the fundamentals, theoretical ideas about what is a person brand and how they are different from other brands. So the following hypothesis is proposed for the relationship between person brand type, religiosity, and post-service recovery satisfaction. So the H1 is after controlling for individual religiosity, consumers who experience a service failure and recovery from a religious slash person brand will express higher, lower levels of pre and post satisfaction and purchase intention. So the the research fundamental first question is that whether there is a bias after controlling for the individual level of religiosity. So that's the first objective of the research and the first hypothesis as well. Now, a little bit of discussion about the nature of brand transgression. So, despite being treated as separate and distinct, um, from each other, service failure, product harm, crisis, and brand transgressions represent a broader phenomenon of consumer experience of negative events with a brand. So, on one hand, these are very much related because all of them offers a negative experience to the consumer. So previous researchers consider service failure as and product harm as brand transgressions, but not, you know, opposite way. Okay. So thus research on brand transgression is generally contextualized on a broader canvas and stand to be focused on act of omission and commission that results in public breaches of trust such as financial fraud, industrial accidents, and workplace harassments. So one can assume that um, some of the researchers distinguish between different type of negative experiences and consider as transgressions as more of a broader nature of um, uh, an activity that is harmful for the society, and other type of transgressions are being considered as personal level. But there is, problem with this definition as well, because, for example, program crisis can be of a nature that is going to impact the whole society rather than only a single individual in many cases. So in most cases, service failure happen at the personal scope level, and an unethical company behavior is perceived through a communal lens. So this is means it's not written in stone, right? So service failure can also happen at a very broader level, right? But usually service failure happens at a personal level, and an unethical company behavior is perceived through a communal lens. How consumers react to religious, liberal, personal brand transgressions is difficult to predict. So, for example, according to social identification theory and similarity attraction theory, consumer behavior is more influenced by how they identify with the transgressor than by the transgression itself. So, one issue is that it means your identity and your identity congruence with the brand is going to be a more dominating factor in some people's point of view when it comes to dealing with the transgressions. So the self-bias argument contends that the customers will be less aggrieved when transgressions are not directed at them. So others said that if it is not directed towards an individual, they should be less aggrieved. These are all contradictory type of um, results that create problems for having a consensus about what is actually the effect. So, other reported that explicit religious priming has a protective effect on brands when service failure is self directed, but has a greater adverse effect when aimed at a vulnerable population. So, so if the population is vulnerable and the transgression was directed at some population, for example, children or teenagers or old age people, then the reaction is more negative. Some other theories that can explain the consumer reaction, the one is the moral disillusionment hypothesis, which suggests that because religious people are perceived as holding a higher moral pedestal, religious brands' moral transgression will result in a more negative reaction as compared to a brand promoting liberal values. So, so they think that because of the religious people considering, or the religious brand considering them at a higher moral pedestal, right? Therefore, they should be held accountable in a more stricter term. On the other side, Hornsey et al. Reported that the post-transgression trust deficit for non-profit organizations was higher as compared to for-profit organizations. So again, this one is supporting the moral disillusionment hypothesis by suggesting that if you are a non-profit organization involved in a transgression, the consumer reaction is going to be more negative. Thus, in the context of moral transgression, one should expect that religious brands will receive a harsher moral judgment as compared to liberal brands in a religious society. So, so what here we are expecting is opposite to the what was initially expected in a personal domain. So at a communal domain, because the religious brand were considered to be more sacred as compared to the liberal brand, especially in a religious society, we were supposed to see more negative reactions. Others suggest that the effect of company moral transgression depend on consumer personal values. So, based on social identity theory, it is expected that the conservative consumer will be less harsh towards religious brand transgression as compared to liberal brand transgressions. So, again, different theoretical lens predict different outcomes for the same type of offense. That is the case that we need to figure out which one is the right way to understand. So, after controlling for individual conservative versus openness to change personality trait, consumer exposed to a moral transgression from a religious person brand will express lower level of positive word of mouth and a weaker purchase intention as compared to a liberal brand. Finally, we want to talk about person brand duality and transgressions. So one of the prerequisites to become a person brand is to achieve a persona that is unified from a person and a commercial entity sold as a product or service in the marketplace with a recognized duality. This definition I already have shared with you The most important implication of this definition is that within a person brand context, it should not matter if the person or the person brand is engaged in the act of transgression. Excuse me. So the main question here is that because the person brands offer a unified entity, and but they are still independent in some way, as because they can behave separately. So what happens, for example, the person behind a person brand, that is, so the body politic, that is linked with the body corporate, right? How any of them doing a transgression is going to have an impact. Will it make a difference in terms of attitude toward the person brand, which means the body corporate? So in other words, there should be no significant difference between consumer response when exposed to individual transgression or transgression by the person brand. So, so in case means there is a celebrity who create a brand that is body corporate. So that celebrity was involved in some transgression, right? For example, tax evasion at a personal income tax level versus the brand involved in tax evasion as a body corporate. So are they going to be having a significant difference in consumer response or not? That's the point. Because based on the King's two body theory, there should not be any difference. A non-significant difference would suggest that regardless of whether an individual or a person brand indulge in transgression, it will generate a similar response from its customers, right? But the important point here that one needs to note is that although the transgression might be happening at individual or a body corporate level, the negative reaction is being measured towards the body corporate, okay? Because that's the commercial entity that we are interested in. So there will be no difference between consumer response, regardless of whether the transgressor is a person or person brand in a person brand context. Okay. So the hypothesis is that because of King's two body theory, we assume that it is not going to have any problem who is the transgressor, because the impact or the negative impact on the body corporate will be same. Excuse me. So we conduct two studies. Um, One was the study one was a 2 into 2 mixed factorial design, because it was pre and post measurements to test the relationship between religiosity, forgiveness, and post recovery satisfaction and purchase intention. Study two was again a 2 into 2 between subject factorial design to test the interactions between brand type and transgressor type on consumer purchase intentions and positive word of mouth. Data for both studies were collected from different cities in Pakistan. Um, so this is the study one explanation here. So either the brand was religious or liberal, and the recovery was pre-post recovery within subject mixed design as a covariate. So we control for the religiosity and see whether there is effect or not. The person brand was manipulated using a description of the person as religious or secular celebrity, and the description of a person brand adherent to a religious or liberal value. So we create those descriptions or the scenarios to prime whether a brand is a religious or a person is a secular brand. Okay, so these all are fictitious brands, and probably one of the limitation of this research is that I haven't done a third study on actual brands. These are the correlation tables. So you can see there is some correlations that are slightly strong, but not very strong, but some are negative and some are positive. So what are the results for the study one? We conducted a MANOVA results, revealed a significant small main effect of a person brand type, but the main effect of recovery was not significant. So it means that initially there was a bias, but the effect size is small. Usually, when we are using fictitious brand with customers having no experience, the effect size is not going to be that high. But the interesting thing is that the difference, although there was a difference, but that difference was not significant, at least at p at 0.05. It becomes significant at p.10. But this discussion is not relevant here, how we take p values and give so much supreme importance to them. But the thing was, at least we can infer is that the bias was diminishing because of the recovery effort. Okay. So, so the interaction between brand type and recovery was significant. So the dependent variable purchase intention results revealed a small main effect for person brand type again, while the main effect of recovery and the interaction term of brand type and recovery were non-significant. So one maneuver was, so one was the satisfaction as a dependent variable, other was the purchase intention as a dependent variable, and we can see that clearly, particularly in case of purchase intention, the post recovery difference become non-significant. And because purchase intentions are quite an important construct, we should take this result in a more serious way. These are the pictorial descriptions. Then the study two was a person brand type into transgressions between subject design with net score of openness to change versus conservation as a covariate. So we control for people personal trait as openness or liberal and then conservative, and then we conduct the results. So the respondent first provide information about their demographic and answer the battery of questions on openness versus conservatism, and then respondent then did a manipulation that was to create the impact, create the impression of religious and liberal person brands. These are the correlation tables. Uh, so the result of between subject factorials for person brand type into transgressor type. So there's a person brand type and then the transgressor type, which means that whether the transgressor was a person or the person brand. Between subject and the net score of tendency to openness as a covariate revealed a non-significant main effect of brand type or transgressor type, and the interaction between brand type and transgression type was also not significant. So nothing significant was found when we compare the interaction between person brand and transgressor type. So even not neither the person brand was significant, neither the transgressor type was significant. This is something different from the previous research because previous research was, considering that maybe there might be a stronger negative reaction toward the religious brand. Our result suggests there is no such difference that is statistically significant, but we need to be a bit conscious about these results because these are the fictitious brand. And I personally think that one more study should be conducted to see a comparison between actual brand. But the problem is that comparing two brands from the real world is a bit of problem because they might have different attributes and characteristics that are not comparable, and therefore might be other factors that are explaining any difference as compared to the transgression. So in study 2 we also want to test H3, and which was tested through this series of independent t-tests. First, we compared consumer purchase intention and word of mouth intentions across transgressor type, whether transgression was a person or a person brand for religious brands. So the result indicate that consumer do not differ statistically in their willingness to engage in word of mouth or purchase in intention regardless of transgressor type. So again, for we first take the data from only religious brand and then compare the transgression either was done by person or person brand using a t-test, and the results were non-significant. Similarly, for the liberal brand, the same happens. There is no difference in consumer response because of transgressor type. Okay. So this was actually supporting our H3, which was based on two King's body theory. So this one was supported. Now these are some discussion. As the service failure and recovery were similar and across brand types, this study can infer that service recovery efforts significantly diminish the initial negative bias towards label person brands. So the thing that we identify based on our results is that yes, there is an initial bias, but the service recovery actually mitigate that negative bias and significantly diminish the initial negative bias. And therefore, it is also possible that if we would have manipulated the intensity of service recovery, that could have a more robust effect in terms of maybe even completely eliminating the bias from the experience. In fact, the rate of change in customer satisfaction is higher for liberal brands as compared to religious brand. suggesting that the consumers may unconsciously adjust their initial bias, maybe. And it is also means if we can, really establish these things, then it will be a very interesting idea to explore that why consumers are more aggressively adjusting their bias, means towards, for example, liberal brands in a religious society, or religious brand in a secular society. Okay. So nonetheless, passes suggest several contextual variables that can be moderate the behavior intention, such as strength of service recovery, as I mentioned earlier. So we can also look into in future, we can look into the strength of service recovery. So a weak, moderate, or a very strong service recovery can change the outcomes of this research. Thus, it is possible to infer that a stronger effort from liberal brands can also convert weaker purchase intention into stronger one. These are the assumptions and a potentially an idea for the future research. In study 2, we investigate if the bias exists in the context of moral transgression. It also, in fact, investigate the impact of transgression attributes to personal person brands. So as you know that there was no difference and we can't find any main evidence of a bias in case of a moral transgression. So if the moral transgression happens, then what we are reporting and what we are claiming is that there is no different, and the narratives are not going to help you by creating any buffering zone for you as a brand. So this is in contradiction with the moral disillusionment hypothesis and expectation violation theory as well. So there are different theories that strongly suggest that this should not happen, but my results are indicating that it doesn't matter. But again, there are a lot of limitations in terms of my research design, and therefore I cannot be, propagating them as a, some breakthrough results, because the data was convenience sampling, the brands were fictitious, so we need to take the results with a pinch of salt before jumping the gun and saying that we are able to establish that these hypotheses were completely wrong or these theories were not correct. So our results for the H3, as no significant difference were found, this is quite encouraging because it supports the theory of the King's tube body, which suggests that it doesn't matter who was the transgressor. Once the transgression happened, either by the person or the person brand, it is going to have a negative impact on the brand satisfaction, purchase intention, and other related variables. So thanks a lot for attending this talk, and I hope it was a bit interesting for you.